This is going to be what I consider a Japanese-inspired design, a long, low bench. I'm kind of designing this one as I go, but once it's all finished, I will have a drawing and a cut list that you can find on my website. This is all going to be made out of Douglas fir. You can find this material at any home store, and it's only $32 worth of material. Let's go ahead and get started by first making the legs. The measurements for the legs are 16 inches, but I like to cut everything a little bit heavy first until I finish all of the milling. So I'm going to cut the 4x4s at 16 and a half. To square up the 4x4s, I'll put a pencil mark on all four sides, and then I'll use the joiner to remove the pencil mark on two of the joined sides, not the opposite sides, making sure to hold the material up tight against the fence. To avoid any confusion, I scribble a circle on the joined surfaces of the board. Then I use the thickness planer and remove the pencil lines that I made earlier. Once those pencil lines are removed, the 4x4s are square. I just finished milling the 4x4s down to 3 1/4 by 3 1/4, being sure to square them up in the process. Starting out on the joiner, then the thickness planer, and I even ran these through the drum sander, although I didn't get that on camera. Now I'm going to take the 2x8s and cut 16 inches off each 2x8, and that will give me a board that will fit in the middle of the two 4x4s. Again, I'm cutting the boards a little bit heavy at 16 and a half. This is how the 2x8 is going to work with this leg design. It will fit in between the two 4x4s, but right now it's a little bit too big. A 2x8 measures 7 1/4 by 1.5 inches. I'm going to mill this down to 6 1/4 by 1 3/8 inches. And now that all of the milling is done, I'll set up a stop block and cut all the parts to the finished length of 16 inches. The sides of the bench are made up of 3 pieces, the 2 posts and the center piece. I've decided to put a taper on the outside posts, and to make that taper, I'll measure in 1 1/4 inches at the top of the leg, make a mark, and then use a straight edge, hold the straight edge at the mark, and then at 0 and trace a line. After using the bandsaw to cut the taper in the legs, I'll use the joiner to clean up any of the blade marks left by the bandsaw. Now you want to be careful here and not remove too much material from one leg. You're trying to keep all the legs roughly the same size, and it usually takes about 2 or 3 passes over the joiner. And this looks pretty good. I'll use the biscuit joiner to join the 3 boards together, and the biscuits don't really add any strength to the glue joint, but it definitely makes it a lot easier to keep the boards nice and level during the glue up. And I always make sure to clean up any of the glue squeeze out with a wet rag before it has a chance to set up. I glued up the legs yesterday and let the glue set up overnight. And now I'm working on a cross brace, and for that I'm going to use a 2x6 and I'll attach it with a lap joint. And the first thing I'm going to do is mill this board down to size. I want it to be 4.5 inches. I also want to run it through the drum sander to clean up the surface a little bit. And because this board is a lot longer than what I need, I will rough cut it to length, and I can cut away some of these problem areas, like a knot over here and a knot over here. Whenever I'm milling a board down, if I can rough cut it to length first, I do, because it makes it that much easier to push through the machines. I'll measure from the outside of the leg 6 inches and then cut the brace to length and use the cutoff from the brace as a guide for the lap joint. A crosscut sled on the table saw is great for cutting lap joints because you can align the marks on your project with the saw curve in the sled. If you want to build the sled that I'm using, I'll have a link in the description to the project video. Okay, so that fits really nice, and now I'm going to make sure that I have a 6-inch reveal from the outside of the leg and then mark the brace for the next lap joint. I just finished up with the brace and it fits really nice. I'm really having a lot of fun with this project and I'm real happy with the way it's turning out. And now I'm getting to work on the top of the bench, and I've decided to go with a 7-inch overhang from the brace on each side. And that'll give me a top that's 71¼ inches. I'm going to make the top out of 2x8s. This board's a little messed up, so it's got a little bit of a rock in it. So first I'm going to try to remove that with the joiner and probably run it through the thickness planer and all that stuff and bring it down to about 1 1/8. And I think that'll look a little bit nicer than this 1.5 inches that I have now. Right now I think this just looks a little thick. I'll use the joiner to flatten out one side of each of the 2x8s and then use the joiner and the table saw to remove the round over and square the edges up. And again, I'll use biscuits to join the two boards together. I just unclamped the top, and this is the side of the boards that I ran through the joiner, and this is really pretty nice and flat. There's a lot of work to do on the other side, so now I'll run the top through the thickness planer to flatten it out. Turns out that I've got some kind of a problem with my thickness planer, so I used 60 grit sandpaper in the drum sander to remove the material and flatten the boards out. And now that the board is nice and flat and the edges are square, I'll use the crosscut sled and the table saw and cut the top to its final length. There's not a lot of strength when you're screwing into end grain, so I'm drilling an 1 1/8 hole and I'll place an inch and an eighth dowel in the hole, and that way I'll be screwing into the cross grain of the dowel. This is something that was pointed out to me a few years ago by a viewer, Ed Tillman. This is something I've been using now for a couple of years, and it really works great. I'm attaching the brace to the legs with wood glue and a 4.5 inch long fastener. I'll countersink a hole for the head of the fastener and then pre-drill for the screw. Here I'm using an 1/8 inch drill bit to drill 4.5 inches down into the leg. Now I've switched to a 1/4 inch drill bit, and I'm only drilling through the brace about 2 1/4 inches deep. I don't want the screw to grab onto the material in the brace. I only want it to grab onto the material in the leg and pull the two pieces together. To attach the top to the base, I'm going to use the biscuit joiner and make slots into the base. Then I'll make clips, and those clips will fit into the slots. This will allow for the top to be able to expand and contract. For the finish, I'm going to use water-based polyurethane. I'm going with water-based because I don't want the Douglas fir to darken. An oil-based finish would darken the Douglas fir. I generally avoid water-based finishes on darker woods like cherry and walnut, sapele, but on lighter woods like Douglas fir or maple or birch plywood, I often will use a water-based polyurethane, applying 3 coats and sanding with 220 in between coats. All right, well, I am really happy with the way this project turned out. It was a fun build, and if you want to build this, I will have a drawing, a cut list, and a material list that you'll be able to find on my website. The nice thing about it was only $32 worth of material. If you like this video, please give it a like, leave a comment, tell a friend. That would be great. It really helps me out. So, thanks for tuning in, and I'll see you soon.